here today with Alayne Crawford, Head of Government and Regulatory Affairs at IBM Canada. And she has joined us today to share her experiences as a woman in leadership. Thank you, Alayne, so much for being with me today.
My pleasure, Lisa. It's so great to reconnect.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So I'd like you just, before we kind of jump in more detail, can you just give us an overview of your career? You've always been just a kick-ass woman, and it's always been really exciting for me to watch you as you've grown in your leadership. So can you take us through a little bit?
Sure, happy to, Lisa. Although, as I often like to share with especially students I meet or mentor, I'm not going to say this is a plan that I designed as a 13-year-old who was passionate about all things journalism. I have crafted a career that I can't believe I've ended up getting to enjoy so far. But it's been a lot of, well, this is in front of me, let's try it out. It all started, I found the school furthest away from home in Canada to spread my wings a little bit, and went to journalism at Carleton, and actually ended up failing out of first year, as people do, and falling back on a political science degree, pursued that for the next 4 years, always intending to still go do journalism. And then in my fourth year, realized that I might need to stop serving at the bar I was working at and get a real job, and ended up getting a job in politics. Somebody took a chance on me, and ended up working in politics for about 4 years before realizing that as much as I am a political nerd and enthusiast, and have actually only become more so later in life, that I wanted to return that to being my hobby. So through word of mouth, let people know, ended up working at a national trade association, the Canadian Automobile Association, and then for an exceptional Canadian telecom company, Shaw Communications. And then currently that is what brought me to IBM, which I like to say is this perfect mix, as it allows me to continue to pursue the international relations degree to a certain extent that I was doing in undergrad, but building off my expertise as more of a Canadian market sector leader, if you will.
Wonderful. So, I mean, it sounds like when you talk about the opportunities that were sort of in front of you, and this is something, some of us struggle with, right? It's like, oh, I'm not sure I'm totally qualified for that. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. What if I'm too junior, too whatever, too so many things, fill in the blanks. I'm really curious about what's given you that, yeah, let me jump in and just try it. Do you get those doubts? Do you get those worries?
All the time.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
I mean, this, Lisa, one of our first lessons in MBA world was, one of our first lessons was the conversation around imposter syndrome. And I continually have that. I think it's getting a bit quieter these days, the older and wiser I get. But absolutely, I think it was, I have constant questions about how I've been able to build a career I have, but then I have these bursts of enthusiasm that counter that. And I like to think that's my yin and my yang to a certain extent. I also, in every one of these opportunities I've been given, it's because somebody's approached me about them. When I'm having those days where I doubt, my fortune is that I've got this powerful, continually expanding network just based on my enthusiasm for others and the gift I've been given in terms of just the network that continues to evolve to my benefit. So I think a lot of those opportunities have come to me thanks to hard work and presence and purpose. It's not necessarily that I'm sitting back here and sketching out the next 7 to 10 years, because once upon a time I did that. And I was going to be in Ethiopia, dealing with the AIDS crisis, and then being an embedded journalist. And here we are. So it's, it's been powerful in terms of now that I start to have a bit of a repertoire on which to reflect just where those relationships and where the power of people has brought me to.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So we met doing our executive MBA at Queen's. And I think, were you the youngest in our cohort, or were you the second youngest in our
I was
cohort?
officially the youngest by 3 months. So
Okay,
I do like to, yeah, I was officially the youngest by 3.
okay, okay. So what was that like?
Once upon a time, I had a great boss in politics who knew that a lot of us were, 20 to 30 years younger than anybody else in any one given room. And she said, if you're ever asked how old you are, because you will get that question, just respond old enough to do this job. And I think that was the gift. I knew I'd been accepted for a reason. I knew that I had my own value to contribute. And I knew I also just wanted to learn. So I was excited to sit in that room with all of you and soak up your knowledge as well. It was interesting. There were certainly times where I felt what I was contributing was less relevant, but I think that's no matter what age you're at. And then I think there's also times where I thoroughly enjoyed getting to see where the puck could go in terms of all of your various careers. And what I often say to others is that, one of the greatest takeaways from that whole experience was the opportunity to tone down some of the narrative in my head and the imposter syndrome, because getting to be in the room with executives of your caliber and, doing negotiations with other CEOs and being successful in them made me realize that, what I had built, while it had been somewhat accidental, was still very powerful. It was actually to an advantage. I think what's interesting is that, while the lessons learned in class weren't necessarily as relevant to me in my day-to-day, just being in a more junior function, I think the runway for them is just that much longer. It was on balance, just added to the experience, I think, Lisa, in conclusion.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So one of the things that I remember, that program was, I think, fairly, positive about bringing women in and making sure that there was some balance there. But there were things I noticed, like the fact that when we were on campus actually attending classes, that all the time the chairs were way too high for me. I would feel like I'd have to sort of hop to get up into them. And I think, I was already, amongst the older students in that cohort. And I'm wondering if we can kind of shift into the work world now. Being a young woman is kind of like a double whammy, right? And then being a pretty blonde on top of that, kind of a triple whammy, I think, in some ways. So like, you must have faced some crap in your career, I'm assuming. You don't have to name names, but I think it's helpful to know kind of what you've faced and what you've noticed.
Oh, well, thanks, Lisa. If we can have this pep talk every morning, that would be great. No, honestly, I often get told I have rose-colored glasses on. I think sometimes those are a little scratched these days as I get older, but I think a blessing for me is that the moments are few and far between, and nothing of the magnitude that I think some of my colleagues have had, certainly. I think there's a stubbornness to me that kind of just drives through despite, and I don't think that's necessarily productive for the next generation. So I'm trying to be conscious of that. The more I get into roles where I'm able to shape that. I think when I reflect on the MBA experience, I actually thought it was encouraging in some regards because there were so many babies being born during our cohort, and other individuals, high performing individuals that had families, which was something I hadn't yet embarked on. And then yet I did reflect sometimes on the fact that it was mostly the men who were having children during the program. Although I think that's changed a little bit since we were in the class. In terms of day to day, I think what I've been fortunate with is always having been, to be quite candid, in long-term relationships. I'm a serial monogamist. And I think that's freed up some capacity to tune out the other. It comes with its own challenges. But I think that's something in terms of kind of the Me Too movements and whatnot. And I'm not sure if this is where you want to take this, but that's where I've been able to escape some of that, I think, both in politics and in private sector. In terms of, women in leadership, I think my personal view is much of my own barriers are more left to me to overachieve, along with my power and my network. And I get excited by that. So I think to date, what I would say in terms of my career trajectory is in terms of the women in the workplace dynamic. I think until recently, I had been in roles more where I could it almost drove me further and created even a greater desire to want to get to higher levels and to want to prove others wrong to a certain extent. And then more recently, I would say, and since the MBA program, I referenced kids. I have now had 2 children. I have 2 lovely young sons and 3 bonus daughters. Life is never boring. It was the first time in the last year that I had to reflect on an outstanding opportunity and realize that this didn't make sense right now. And that was due to, I don't think necessarily just being a woman. And that's where I take some great comfort. I think that while I have faced some minimal barriers throughout my career, they have been minimal, I would argue, in comparison to many of my counterparts. I am a white woman first and foremost, and I'm completely conscious of that dynamic, and started at a socioeconomic level, whereas my parents were working class. I certainly never wanted for anything, and was given so many opportunities being a female growing up in a very dynamic city of Calgary in the 90s. Boom cycles aside, I started in a great place, and I think it's up to me to just build on to that. So I'm increasingly conscious that there are barriers that exist, and maybe that's just upon reflection, but that I am also in a position in which it is my responsibility to make sure that, because I might have a slight advantage, that it is up to me to do more and to do better. Not saying things are broken from my current experience, but that there is more to be done. I hope that answers things, Lisa. I kind of went on a trajectory there, but
yeah, no, it does. And I think that as a white woman, when I sort of started to focus more on women's leadership, I initially kind of thought, yeah, this is finally, I'm able to sort of put my feminism into practice and really support women to be able to gain more ground. And the thing is, there are barriers. It's very clear when you look at statistics. We're both in Canada, and we live in a place where we have a lot of equality, and yet we're still not well represented in senior and executive leadership. So there's still an issue. And yet, when I first started, I sort of thought, I'm helping women who are having this difficulty, and very quickly realized, I've been discriminated against. I've certainly been held back because of being a woman. I've been held back by those inner messages of gender bias and what it means to be a woman and all of those things. But I'm a white woman. And so, and an able-bodied woman and that kind of thing. I do have a disability, but it's a hidden disability, and I have ADHD, and so that creates a whole other kind of challenge. But I get to choose who I share that with. I get to pretend to be ultra organized and can hide it, whereas a Black woman or a woman in a wheelchair can't hide that and deals with that discrimination in a much different way. Women who are in the LGBT community as well, trans women, like there's and that's a whole other thing, right? You've got women who are raised as identified as female at birth, who then transition, and they have a completely different challenge than someone who is identified male at birth and then transitions to be a trans woman. And so, I mean, there are all sorts of different complexities there and intersectionalities that, I just work on having that awareness. And I think something that I'm hearing you kind of imply is that you're recognizing some of those real privileges and that you're using them because you're recognizing that your experiences aren't the same as other women coming up. I think about, and I thought a lot when I did my MBA, I thought a lot about the fact that I was raised in a lower socioeconomic class. And in fact, when I finally finished high school at 19, my mom was like, hey, great. And never asked me what I was doing next or any, like, it just wasn't a thing, right? Nobody had that expectation of me. It was super exciting that I had graduated high school because my mom didn't, my sister didn't, and that sort of thing. So, obviously some differences there. But it's as you're recognizing that, there's some mentorship and everything that you're doing, I think, there to really help improve things for other women as well, I think.
Yeah, and to your point on the mentorship, I think that's where, and it's always dual for me. I think to date in my career, I was moving so quickly, getting various opportunities. I don't think I'd taken the time maybe to reflect, to your point, on the barriers that continue to exist, or even my own experience distinct from those of my friends who are maybe of a visible minority. And then more recently, and perhaps this is pandemic induced, and one of the additional blessings, I've come to realize how much convening the conversations with others, whether it's a BIPOC style group, or it's a women in IBM organization, which there are plenty of, which is one of the many encouraging things about this place. Convening those conversations and working through those shared experiences and learning from each other is one of my greatest joys in life. And hands down, all of our experiences are distinct, and yet there's not one of those conversations I don't come away from having learned something new. And I've had to have some really hard reflections lately, just even on how I was approaching dialogues or conversations or verbiage, to realize that they were, while not ill-intentioned, an area for improvement. And that's just one example. So, where I think I continue to try to drive forward and be driven by the distinctions that continue to exist that may or may not impact me directly. But I think where I've come to for now is that the power for me, and both from a perspective of I owe it at a minimum, but also because I get a lot from it, is to continue to have these conversations, to strive to do better where I have the opportunities to do so, create platforms on which others' voices, not that they need me to do this, but could be heard even louder. I'm trying to view that as my to do at this step on the journey, if you will, as I continue to try to move forward with the hope of eventually changing things even further from other positions within whatever organization it is I'm out.
Yeah. I think it sounds like it's, it's lending your privilege to help, and so it's not about empowering someone else or anything. It's simply saying, yeah, I have this privilege, and how can it help you, right? Can it be a tool for you? Fantastic.
Also because it's just about engaging with people, and I'm an extrovert by default, increasingly an introvert as I age. But I am an extrovert in the sense, the truest form, in that I get energy from other interactions. And so, it's even just hearing from you and having the opportunity to engage with you, and I'm not getting these fixes as much in their current setting, although we're getting there. These are the best parts of the day. And it's the same no matter, which conversations are being held. Being purposeful and making the time has been something I've been trying to prioritize better, coming out of maternity leave and pandemic and all of that, because these are the conversations that fill me up, and these are the conversations that I hear the most about too, is when we do make the time to sit around and talk about our own experiences, our shared experiences, our opportunities to do more. I'm not going to figure those out in a silo, and that's been a maybe not monumental realization, but a reflection and something I'm really trying to pursue going forward.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I think we talked a bit about your, you mentioned that imposter syndrome, and I now I'm forgetting the quote that you said. Somebody said to you,
"Oh, I'm old enough to do this job." Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
I'm old enough to do this job. Yeah.
Yes, I have to remember that, because I think there are so many women that I work with who could absolutely use that. It's own it, right? It's just being willing to see it and to say, yeah, no, but I'm here and I've got this. So is there anything more, if we talk about that inner critic that says, oh, you're an imposter, you don't belong here, whatever, are there any tips that you have used other than sort of, yeah, I belong here and I can do this, that have really helped you?
Oh, so many things, Lisa. And what works on one day, I don't know about you, doesn't work the next day always.
Oh yeah.
For me, it's interesting. At one point it was meditation, was something that helped me. I have a very active narrative in my head, and it helped me distinguish between fact and fiction, and what was there as my mind trying to entertain me and what was actually something I needed to pursue. Right now I've come to realization that it's just not something that fits for me right now. So I'm running now, and through that I find calm. It is just sometimes even stepping back, and this sounds so corny, but like, sometimes I'll look at myself in the mirror and say, you got this, and then walk away. And I was a competitive dancer when I was younger. And I remember the energy that I would feel before going on stage. And, in those conversations where I am more nervous or conscious of some sort of power dynamic or whatever, I just try to think back to that feeling and channel some of that. Because, it was that energy when channeled for good that led to so many great things. But honestly, like, it's, I'm not a big journaler. I always tried to journal. I'm not very good at that. I enjoy reading, although these days I often fall asleep partway through chapter 1. And quite candidly, something that I've really come to find great value in is therapy. And especially during the pandemic, I was on a pretty regular regimen there. And also realizing that it's there, not necessarily just to unstick a specific issue, but to continue to try and work through all the thoughts going through my head, and clear up the space so that I can be an even more productive or more present mother, employee, whatever it is. It's about, for me, experimenting, I think, always, and being curious. I'm increasingly conscious, I would say, in my 30s of what this is, and trying to want to work through that, because I think when I can calm it down, just the more powerful I'm able to be in conversations or present, or even just playing with my kids. Like, it's amazing how it's draining our battery all day, to a certain extent, or at least in my case it is. So why wouldn't I continually try to find different ways? So if you have any tools or tricks, like, I'm also always open to trying to learn more, and that's a big thing for me, like listening to podcasts, not over listening, because I also feel like we can also self-help ourselves to death here, but just always being open to other ways to try, because I do have to be very purposeful about curating this narrative in my head, if you will.
Yeah. It's funny because the idea of meditation, I've heard running being referred to as a moving meditation. It's never been something I've gotten into. To me, the sitting or lying down meditation is way better for me. But yeah, I mean, being in your body, right, instead of in your head is such a valuable thing for people who have that tendency toward rumination. Massive. And just being present. It's, I spend a lot of my workshops, a lot of the coaching that I do has some element of communication as well as sort of understanding inner barriers and the inner critic and that sort of thing. And, one of the things I constantly go to is being present and being curious, right?
Yes.
Instead of making those assumptions. And we do that to ourselves. We make all these assumptions. Look at you, you're so this, and you're going to mess this up and everything. And I mean, anyone who's watching this probably has heard me talk about it enough. So, which is why I'm, I want to hear it from you. But one of the things I will say is that, as we sort of have that voice that comes up and says whatever, you don't belong here, or you're going to be found out that you're not good enough. And I remember even from when I started university, doing my undergrad, I remember feeling like someone was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, "Oh, we made a mistake. You don't belong here," right? And it was just going to be some administrative error that actually allowed me in. But being able to notice that. And I think that's where something like meditation can really help, because if we don't notice that we're on that hamster wheel, we don't have any ability to go, "Oh, look at that." and it's so often we just try to push it away and not notice it and not feel it. And it's like, oh no, it's there. You're going to have to deal with it in some way, whether it's a panic attack when you need to give your next presentation, or it's it's shying away from those opportunities that are there. So might as well deal with it by looking it straight in the face and going, "Oh, I see you. Yeah. And I've got this. It's okay."
Although, and I had to say, I saw this, I think it was actually in your LinkedIn feed the other day. What I've also had to, like, at one point, it was about just recognizing the thoughts. And then it was not trying to label the thoughts as bad or good was another thing. And I think you had something on that recently.
Yeah.
And that's even something I've had to do with my emotions and other things in my life, is it's these overusages in our society, I find, of things that are bad and things that are good. Yeah. And they aren't often. They are often just what they are. And so I spent a lot of time in recent years thinking, and to your point, like, when I first started doing meditation, I was trying to beat down thoughts and, I was thinking that I need to have this absolutely clear mind. And thankfully somebody led me down a different path. But, it's now that I recognize the thoughts, it's not labeling them as bad or good. And it's also not trying to make them work in a way that they're not designed to, I guess, if you will. I try to view the narrative in my head a little bit as a superpower, and one of my superpowers, because it does also, when channeled in a certain way, lead to, when I recognize it has led me to where I am and hopefully to where I'm going to go. And that, so I'm trying to be kinder, I think, is where I'm going with this, Lisa, to the voice in my head these days, and also recognize its power. This is a light example, but I have to share with you. I had this great realization just pre-pandemic, when my husband had the opportunity to go to Paris for a conference, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to come with you. It's been so long since I've been there." And I was texting with my parents that same day, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to get back to Paris. Remind me when we went there." And they turned back to me and said, "You've never been to Paris, Alayne." And I had it conceived in my head that I had been to Paris. And that's just like one super lighthearted realization that I often like to reference, because it is a force. It is a force. And I'm in awe of it. Just going back to meditation, one final thought I thought of while you're chatting there was, the other thing I've also, like, I think I alluded to this, I've also had to realize that right now meditation isn't it for me, and that's okay. So one of the things I worked through with my therapist was she, you know, in the early sessions was that I was like, oh, I always found such peace and calm when I was doing meditation. And so then I kept on trying to do meditation, and then meditation wasn't happening. And then I was feeling bad about not doing the meditation.
Yeah.
And she's like, are you feeling better because you're doing the working out? Are you doing better because you're reading more, you know, regularly, all this? And then she's like, that, and Lord bless her, you know, they're not there to solve all your problems, but she kind of led me down that path, that this is what works for you right now, and trying to fight that is going to be not impossible, but is that the most productive approach? So
yeah, it's, I mean, what I'm hearing you doing is balancing self-care, you know, with self-compassion, right? And noticing that, because yeah, sometimes, you know, I remember asking, because I've been in like deep psychotherapy for a number of years. So I remember saying to my psychiatrist, just tell me, you know, what's the minimum effective dose for meditation? Like, because I'm busy, I got to keep, you know, I got to keep going here. And he said, well, an hour a day. And I said, an hour a day is not happening, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, like what's the minimum effective dose? And he said, 2 hours a day. And I'm like, you just upped it. And he goes, yeah, I can up it more too. But that's the thing, right? It's like there's an ability to kind of get perfectionistic about that.
yes.
But for me, I know that I must meditate, because it's like brushing my teeth. I know that especially with ADHD, and you know, it's not a mild case of ADHD, and you know, if I'm not looking after my brain, I can lose focus so badly. And that you know, one meditation session does not help me to be a more focused person, but a meditation practice really does. But I think it's knowing, you know, what things work for you, but then also being able to say, what do I need right now? And that's the self-compassion piece. What do I need right now? You know what, I really need to read a book more than I need to meditate right now. That's okay, right? You know, it's your patterns are more what you're looking at, and not getting too hung up on any one thing. You know, when we talk about self-compassion and that kind of thing, it's you and in fact, I have a post that I think just came out. You know, I scheduled them in advance, but I think it just came out the other day about or it's not out yet. No tires, just gas. It's from the movie Cars, which my kids were really into when they were small. But
Great movie. Great movie.
But basically, you know, like Lightning McQueen is in a race and he goes in for a pit stop and he says, no tires, just gas, because he just wants to keep going, and he blows a tire and risks the whole race based on that. And so, you know, I think I was really no tires, just gas for a really long time, and I'm paying for it now. And I'm learning how to shift gears and to say, in this way, you know, I mean, I've been looking after the tires in other ways, but you know, really shifting and saying, actually, I count too, and I need to look after myself, because not only, you know, and as women, we so often say things like, you know, I need to look after myself because my children depend on me, and, you know, and all of this kind of thing. And it's like, I need to look after myself because I deserve to live a healthy life and, you know, survive into old age and all of those things. I deserve that, regardless of whether my children need me or not. And I think that's just so important. I'd like to wrap it up with a question. And what I'd like to ask is, if you were to mentor your younger self, what would you want to make sure that you were bestowing?
I think, and I was reflecting on this before our conversation, because I like to say I live with minimal regrets. I think I wish I would have spent more of a certain decade of my life experimenting. And not in the exciting way that I'm sure a few minds could have, but if I had this idea, pursuing it a bit more, maybe building something out, collaborating with friends on doing this startup, undoubtedly if it failing, like all sorts of things like that. I think that's still very much available to me in this current world, but there's just more risks associated with it. And I think, there was a part of me, for whatever reason, this will require further reflection, was so set on getting to the next where I thought I was supposed to be, and having not necessarily stability, but that profession, and very focused on having what I deemed was to be, a not stable but exciting and fulfilling and well-paid profession. And I wish I would have played around a little bit more, and pursued a few other thoughts, because I think none of those experiences would I've regretted, because I think there's something that comes out of everyone, even though so few of them always succeed. But that's something on reflection these days that I wish I had done more of. But at the same time, I try to find myself comforted by the fact that, I chose the path I did because it felt right based on the information I had at the time. So, and maybe the experimenting is for the next chapter. So it's, that's the one thing. My kids have cleared my mind, and kids have made me a more purposeful employee and a more driven individual. They just are a different chapter right now. And it makes it, at least for me, and you are courageous in terms of starting your own business, seem like it's less of an option right now, or at least there's more variables involved with trying to build something or start a business. So that's one thing I wish I'd done. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think I'd tell little Alayne to play a little bit more, if you will. But, yeah.
Very good. Very good. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been just wonderful to talk to you and to hear your experiences. And I'm so appreciative that you're sharing those with other women out there, and really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, and thank you for thinking of me. This was just such a privilege, Lisa, and I appreciate you tolerating all my fun technical challenges.
No worries, no worries. I should say Alayne's been on her phone because her internet was really spotty today. So I'm glad that we were actually able to connect. And yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone who's watching, and please do like and subscribe or follow me. If you have questions, leave them in the comments or send me a direct message. If you have questions for Alayne, send them to me and I'll make sure she gets them. And thank you so much. We will see you soon. Bye.